Your sister owes $420,000, my mother said, dropping a manila folder onto the kitchen island like it was a stack of old mail she was tired of dealing with. I already spoke with the loan officer. He's expecting a wire transfer from your account by Thursday morning. If you refuse, you are done in this family. We are not asking you, Kira, we are telling you. I stood at the edge of the kitchen in the house I grew up in, a 4-bedroom colonial in Plano, Texas, that my parents had spent 2 decades filling with everything my sister wanted and very little I needed. My mother had her arms crossed, her chin tilted up in that particular way she had when she believed the conversation was already decided. My father stood behind her near the dining room, nodding slowly, not meeting my eyes. My sister was seated at the island, picking at the label on a sparkling water bottle, like none of this had anything to do with her. Her husband was leaning against the wall by the sliding glass door, arms folded, wearing a watch I was certain he had not owned 6 months ago. I looked at the folder, I looked at my sister, I looked back at my mother. Then I'm done, I said. I picked up my car keys from the counter, walked to the front door, and stepped out into the October air. That night, I received an alert on my phone that changed everything I thought I understood about the people I came from. 48 hours later, 53 missed calls sat unopened on my screen. I didn't answer a single one. I opened the group text and typed 4 words. You should have asked, then put the phone face down on my kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water. My name is Kira. I'm 29 years old. I'm a licensed professional engineer at a structural consulting firm in Austin, Texas. I passed the PE exam on my first attempt at 26, while paying off my own student loans, sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate, and eating a lot of rice and canned beans. Nobody in my family acknowledged it. My mother posted about my sister's wellness brand relaunch that same week. The post got 47 comments. I wasn't worth posting about. Before I tell you exactly what I did in those 48 hours, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever had someone mistake your patience for a blank check, hit that like button. This one's for you. Growing up, the difference between my sister and me was not subtle. I was the one who studied at the kitchen table while she watched TV. I was the one my father told to figure it out. I was the one who applied for every scholarship I could find and still came up short and still found a way. My sister was the one my parents called brilliant for doing the minimum, the one who received a car for her 18th birthday, while I took the city bus to my part-time job, the one my mother described to her friends as the creative one, the spirited one, as if what I was doing, building a real career with my own hands, required no spirit at all. She was 24 when she launched what she called a clean beauty and wellness collective. She sold botanical serums, crystal-infused tinctures, and a subscription box she marketed online as a ritual, not a routine. My parents gave her $50,000 to start it. Money they had told me, repeatedly, they could not spare when I was borrowing for school. They told their friends at church. My mother framed a magazine feature my sister had paid to appear in, and hung it in the hallway near the front door, the first thing you saw when you walked in. For 2 years my sister posted from Tulum and Sedona and a rented villa on the Amalfi Coast, calling each trip a brand retreat. Her husband traveled with her everywhere. They drove matching leased SUVs. They had renovated a kitchen in a house whose mortgage I would later discover was 4 months behind. None of it was profit, not a single dollar of it was real. The October dinner was not a dinner, it was a setup. I had driven up from Austin on a Friday, telling myself it was a routine visit. My mother had called twice that week, which was unusual. She didn't call me often. When I arrived, nothing was cooking. The house smelled empty. My father was at the dining table with his hands folded. My sister and her husband were already there. The folder had been placed at my seat at the kitchen island like a place setting. The loan documents inside showed a principal balance of $420,000 tied to my sister's business LLC. The account was 60 days past due and entering default. The lender had begun formal collection proceedings. I asked my mother how this involved me. She told me she had contacted the bank and informed them that I would be stepping in to cover the balance. She had given them my name and my employer's contact information. She had done this without telling me. She had done this before I walked in the door. I asked her to repeat herself so I could be sure I had heard correctly. She repeated it without flinching. My brother-in-law pushed off the wall and walked toward me, close enough to make clear he wanted me to feel the pressure of his proximity. He told me that 420,000 was nothing to someone in my position. He said my sister would lose her business, then they'd lose the house, then where would that leave them? He used the word family with the particular emphasis people use when they mean debt you owe us for existing. My mother said I was selfish. My father said I had always carried a chip on my shoulder. My sister cried, the tears arriving with the same perfect timing they always had, since we were children, whenever she needed them to work. My father delivered the ultimatum with the full weight of a man who had never heard the word no and meant it. He said if I didn't authorize the transfer by Thursday morning, I was out of their lives permanently. No holidays, no inheritance, no family. He stood there with his chest expanded, fully expecting the word inheritance to function like a leash. It didn't. I said what I said, picked up my keys and left. I was 3 miles away, sitting at a red light, when my phone buzzed with a notification I had set up years earlier and mostly forgotten about. I used a premium credit monitoring service. Not because I expected trouble, but because my professional standing in the engineering industry is tied directly to my financial record, and I had worked too hard to let something slip through unnoticed. A licensed professional engineer does not get a second warning from a regulatory board. The alert read, severe delinquency reported, commercial account in default. I pulled into a gas station and opened the app. The account had been opened 14 months earlier. The principal was $420,000, the exact number on those documents in the folder. The business name attached was my sister's LLC. The borrower of record was her company, but listed beneath it as the personal guarantor was my name, my social security number, my date of birth. I sat in that parking lot for a long time without moving. They had not just called me to dinner to ask for money. 14 months ago they had gone to a lender, presented documents they had kept from when I briefly lived at home during college. Old W-2s, a tax return, a copy of a financial aid letter, and forged my signature on a personal guarantee agreement. For over a year I had been legally tied to a failing business I had never agreed to support, and they had invited me to that kitchen to convince me to pay it off quietly before I ever found out it existed. They wanted me to write the check and walk away believing I had done a generous thing. By the time I crossed back into Austin city limits, I had already emailed my attorney. I retained him the next morning. He was a commercial litigator I had worked with once before on a contract dispute, precise, expensive, and immune to things that were supposed to unsettle people. By 9:30 on Monday, we were inside the commercial lending division of the regional bank that had issued the loan. The loan officer was expecting a different kind of meeting. He had spoken with my mother and believed this was a family settling a debt quietly, adult children cleaning up what parents could not. My attorney placed both hands flat on the table and explained what the meeting actually was. We reviewed the origination file together. My forged signature on the personal guarantee was visibly inconsistent with any document I had signed in the past decade. The identification materials used to verify my identity were 13 years old. No one at the institution had contacted me directly. No one had verified my current address, my employer, or my consent. The bank had accepted a 6-figure exposure on a guarantee backed by paperwork retrieved from a suburban storage closet. My attorney told the loan officer calmly that what he was holding was documented evidence of bank fraud and identity theft. The officer's practiced customer service expression dissolved in real time. I told him that if any automatic withdrawal was initiated against any account linked to my social security number, or if a delinquency was reported to the credit bureaus under my identifier, my legal team would hold the institution jointly liable for professional damages. A commercial default on my record would trigger a mandatory review of my PE licensure by the Texas Board of Professional Engineers. The damages would not be difficult to calculate. We left with copies of the full origination file, and I authorized my attorney to retain a financial investigator. What the investigator found was worse than identity theft. By Tuesday afternoon, I was in a conference room staring at 4 years of my sister's business financials. There was no supply chain. There were no actual wholesale contracts with the boutique retailers she had named in her pitch materials. The inventory she photographed for her brand content was largely rented for shoots and returned. The business had generated almost nothing in legitimate revenue. What it had generated was investor capital. For 2.5 years, my sister and her husband had been quietly approaching wealthy individuals, mostly people connected to my parents through their church and their neighborhood, and soliciting private investments. They promised returns of 20 to 30% annually. They produced fabricated performance reports. They paid early investors using money from later investors, running a textbook Ponzi structure, keeping it alive just long enough to sustain their lifestyle. The $420,000 in default was not the debt of a business that had tried and failed. It was the final pressure point of a fraud that had taken money from retirees, from families my parents had known for 20 years, from people who trusted my sister specifically because my mother had introduced her to them as a rising entrepreneur with a thriving brand. My parents had not just stolen my identity, they had used my forged guarantee as a temporary cash infusion when the scheme began collapsing, buying my sister a few more months of fake stability at the cost of my name, my career, and my financial record. They had been willing to let my professional license get flagged by a regulatory body. They were willing to let my entire career implode, and they had planned to accomplish all of this without me ever finding out. I thought about the last time my mother had told me she was proud of me. I couldn't find the memory. My attorney asked how I wanted to proceed. I told him we were going federal. We filed a Form 211 whistleblower disclosure with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, detailing the fraudulent investor solicitations and the unreported income. We filed a complaint with the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center documenting the interstate wire transfers my brother-in-law had used to move stolen funds through shell accounts across state lines. We filed a formal identity theft affidavit with the FTC and a fraud report with the Social Security Administration. We submitted everything with the complete forensic accounting binder attached. Tuesday morning brought my family's second attempt, and I was not surprised by it. My mother posted on Facebook. The photograph she chose showed my sister holding her 4-year-old daughter, a little girl who had her mother's curls, and as far as any of her pediatric records showed, no health conditions whatsoever. In my mother's caption, she wrote that the business debt had been incurred paying for my niece's treatment of a serious respiratory illness. She wrote that I had been approached with medical bills and responded that my accounts were more important than a child's health. None of it was true, not a sentence of it. The debt had been spent on villa rentals, first-class flights, and a kitchen renovation. Cousins I hadn't spoken to since high school were tagging my employer's account in the comment section within 2 hours. An aunt I had once been close to left a voicemail, so vitriolic I had to listen to it twice to make sure I had heard the specific language correctly, because my attorney was going to need it verbatim. I did not respond to a single message. I opened a secure folder and spent the next hour taking screenshots, timestamps, usernames, specific accusations that touched my professional conduct. I forwarded the file to my attorney. He responded within 20 minutes. He said we were opening a civil defamation action. The third attempt came Tuesday evening in the parking structure beneath my firm's building. I was heading to my car after a late call when my brother-in-law stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. He looked nothing like the composed man who had leaned against that kitchen wall on Friday. He was unshaven, his coat was wrinkled. His eyes moved the way eyes move when a person has been awake for 2 days convincing themselves of things that are not true. He had a document in his hand, a new loan application from a private lender. He told me to sign it. He told me it was the only way to stop the federal activity that had already begun rippling through the bank. Then he told me that if I refused, he would go to local television news stations and tell them I had embezzled investor capital from my sister's company and used my engineering credentials to conceal the trail. I let him finish every word. Then I raised my left wrist, brought my watch to my mouth, and tapped the screen. The recording indicator activated. I repeated back everything he had just said, slowly, including his name and the date. Texas is a one-party consent state. The recording was entirely legal. The camera dome mounted directly above us had been recording since the moment he walked in. He stared at my wrist. The arrogance didn't fade, it collapsed. There is a difference. I told him that he had just committed extortion in a restricted corporate facility with active security cameras, and that the audio file was already uploading to an encrypted server. I told him to pick up the loan application he had dropped and remove himself from the building before I called security to do it for him. He left the document on the ground. He left at something close to a run. I picked up the application, added it to my evidence folder, and drove home. Wednesday morning, I made one more move. My attorney's investigator had flagged the secondary debt attached to my sister's collapsed scheme. $280,000 in promissory notes from a private equity lending group, secured against my parents' home in Plano. My parents had pledged their house, the house where my mother had dropped that folder in front of me and told me I was finished, as collateral for the debt my brother-in-law had used to keep the pyramid from falling. The private lenders, when my attorney reached them, were already frightened. Federal investigations have a way of making secondary creditors very motivated to exit their positions. They wanted out before a government seizure removed them from the recovery order entirely. I offered to purchase the promissory notes at 40 cents on the dollar. They accepted within the hour. I signed the assignment agreements and transferred the funds. By Wednesday afternoon, I was the primary secured creditor on a loan collateralized by my parents' home in Plano. I owned the debt that stood between them and the street. They did not know this yet. That evening they were celebrating. I learned this later. My mother had received a notification showing the outstanding bank balance had transferred to a new entity. She assumed I had broken, panicked, found a quiet way to make it go away. My brother-in-law told my sister the same thing. They opened something expensive. My sister reviewed her notes for the investor brunch she had scheduled for Thursday morning. Another round of solicitations targeting my parents' church connections. A final attempt to bring in enough fresh capital to survive. They raised their glasses to my defeat. At 7:45 Thursday morning, while my sister was arranging centerpieces at a hotel event space in North Dallas, federal agents executed simultaneous search warrants at the venue, at her home in Frisco, and at my parents' house in Plano. I was at my desk in Austin when my phone began to ring. My mother called 3 times in 4 minutes, my father twice. My sister's number appeared once, then my brother-in-law's, then numbers I recognized from the family group text, extended relatives who had posted on my mother's Facebook thread days earlier, calling me things I had screenshot for my attorney. 53 missed calls over 2 hours. I watched the screen. I did not pick up. I opened the group text, typed 4 words, and hit send. You should have asked. I blocked every number on the list, starting with my mother's, moving through the extended family in the order they had come after me online. Each contact removed felt like setting down something heavy I hadn't noticed I was still carrying. The federal charges came down over the following weeks. My sister was indicted on wire fraud and securities fraud. My brother-in-law was named as a co-conspirator. My parents were charged as accessories. They had knowingly provided my identifying documents to the lender and signed supporting materials they knew to be fraudulent. My mother's attorney attempted to argue she hadn't understood what she was signing. The government had the emails she had exchanged with my brother-in-law in the months before the loan was originated. 2 months later, I sat in the front row of a federal courtroom in Dallas and testified for just under 2 hours. I did not talk about hurt feelings. I did not describe a lifetime of being the family scapegoat, though I could have. I brought documents. I authenticated the forensic accounting file. I walked the prosecution through the origination timeline, the forged guarantee, and the wire transfer logs showing how my brother-in-law had moved stolen investor funds through his Delaware shell companies. When I stepped down, I did not look at the defense table. My sister received 40 months in federal prison. My brother-in-law received 54 months on the tax evasion charges that had surfaced when investigators reviewed how he had been moving funds. My parents, who cooperated partially after the indictment, received supervised probation and financial penalties they could not pay, because by then the house in Plano had been foreclosed. I was the creditor of record. The sale proceeds were mine by law. My parents found me on the courthouse steps afterward. My mother reached for my arm. She said she was sorry. She said they had been desperate. She said they loved me. I stepped back gently so that she could not make contact. I told her that when I passed my PE exam, I had called home to share it with her. She had said that was nice and asked if I'd seen my sister's latest content. I told her that when I was working double shifts in college, my father told me that financial struggle built character. I told her I had believed him, and I had let it make me harder, and that the version of me standing in front of her now had been built entirely without their help. I told her that the people who raised me had treated my success as a resource they were entitled to draw from, and they had been willing to drain it at the cost of my name, my license, and my career. I wished them whatever peace they could find in what remained, but I was not part of it. I turned around and walked to my car. 6 months later, my firm promoted me to senior project engineer. I used the net proceeds from the foreclosure sale, money that came to me as the primary secured creditor, to establish a scholarship fund through UT Austin's Cockrell School of Engineering. The fund is specifically for first-generation engineering students who are financially independent from their families. Recipients must be entirely self-supporting to qualify. The selection criteria were not difficult for me to write. I had been that student once. I knew exactly what she needed and exactly what she never got. Some people say blood is thicker than water. They use it as a reason to absorb things that would destroy them, to fund the delusions of people who have decided their comfort is someone else's obligation. They hold it out like a debt you incurred at birth. But I had been a structural engineer long enough to know that the strength of any bond depends entirely on what it's made of. Some bonds carry load, some are decorative, and some, when tested, turn out to have been forged. I knew the difference. In the end, so did the federal government.